If death is as horrible as is claimed, how is it that after the passage of a certain period of time, we consider happy any being, friend or enemy who has ceased to live?" End quote. Now, we can't exclude Arthur Schopenhauer from this essay. This 19th century philosopher claimed that life's suffering far outweighs its pleasures and that we're better off not existing. A claim embraced by the anti-natalist philosopher David Benatar, who explains in his book Better Never to Have Been that coming into existence accompanies serious harm, so much so that it's immoral to give birth to new beings. In his book, Benatar presents a very rational approach toward life and death, carefully comparing the pros and cons of both conditions, leading to his conclusion that it's better not to come into existence. He stated, "We infrequently contemplate the harms that await any newborn child: pain, disappointment, anxiety, grief, and death. For any given child, we cannot predict what form these harms will take or how severe they will be, but we can be sure that at least some of them will occur." End quote. What characterizes these branches of thought is this: a recognition of a significant degree of suffering in life and, more interestingly, a tendency toward non-existence, either through the elusive escape from the cycle of rebirth as a consequence of ascetic practice or through not being born in the first place. According to Schopenhauer, there is a blind, irrational urge to exist and self-sustain despite life's ingrained misery, which he called the will to live, which is extremely difficult to bypass. We can do as we will, but we can't will as we will, according to Schopenhauer, which explains why we tend to live in ways that so obviously generate suffering. Consider our insatiable desires for power, social status, and wealth. When satisfied, the feeling of contentment is only temporary, and we're thrown back into the cycle of desire and discontent rather quickly. Thus, our lives become this perpetual chase of satisfying desire after desire, always leading to another want or need, never bringing lasting fulfillment. So, when we look at life's conditions, isn't there something to be said for the views of Schopenhauer, Benatar, and Cioran? How liberating is it to be bereft of life when the ongoing dissatisfaction with existence fades, as if an unbearable bad movie finally ends? In non-existence, there's nothing to worry about. Minor concerns like choosing what to wear or eat, and more pressing issues such as war, poverty, and illness all come to a halt. If death grants us such relief, isn't it something to look forward to then? Here's where Freud's death drive comes into play. Force that opposes the life drive and entails an unconscious desire to escape life's ongoing suffering. So could it be that the case for non-existence observed in thinkers like Schopenhauer, Benatar, and Cioran is not just a product of rational thinking, but also originates from an unconscious force that longs for annihilation? Could it be that besides our conscious attempts to survive and thrive, there's an underlying propensity to return to an inorganic state? Now let's take a closer look at Freud's theory. We've all witnessed in other people, or perhaps even personally experienced, a curious interest in self-destruction. It could be the urge to take copious amounts of intoxicants as a means to tune out, accompanying the risk of poisoning and other potentially long-term health consequences. Or what about the inexplicable desire for self-harm, such as picking at a scab or engaging in more violent, self-damaging behaviors that cause physical harm? What's the allure of these forms of self-destruction? Could they arise from a mysterious, elusive inner longing for demise? As mentioned, Freud's views on human motivation shifted after he became aware of certain self-destructive tendencies that he couldn't reconcile with his earlier thinking. It became apparent to him that the totality of human pursuits couldn't be traced back to survival and pleasure alone. There seemed to be a more sinister, darker layer to what drives us. Could it be that besides our inherent will to live, there's also a will to perish? We've explored earlier the allure of non-existence as an argument favoring Freud's death drive. It explained why we might consciously and unconsciously prefer death over life. According to Freud, the death drive is a biological drive in living organisms, also called thanatos, the Greek mythological personification of death, as opposed to eros, referred to as the life force or life drive, which includes self-preservation, reproduction, and creativity. The death drive is an inherent desire to return to the inanimate, an initial state from which the living entity once departed. Freud wrote, "If we are to take it as a truth that knows no exception, that everything living dies for internal reasons, becomes inorganic once again, then we shall be compelled to say that the aim of all life is death, and, looking backwards, that inanimate things existed before living ones." End quote. The death drive is more than simply our journey toward death, which is more of a biological fact, as we all die eventually. The death drive is an active force. Aside from our imminent journey from the cradle to the grave, it's an unconscious longing for demise, or, as we could say, the wish for this journey to end sooner than biologically determined. It's the tension that arose by departing from nothingness that tries to cancel itself out, a drive to return to where it came from. So we could look at Icarus' actions not as bravery or youthful recklessness, but as a manifestation of the unconscious death drive to escape from the domain of tension into nothingness. Life inspires more dread than death. It is life which is the great unknown, wrote Cioran, to which we could say that death is the great known, the state that's plain as day, as there is nothing there, nothing to attain, nothing to run from, nothing to endure, nothing to worry about, which makes this great nothing so liberating. But Freud's death drive and manifestations within human behavior are more complex than a blunt desire for non-existence, even though this drive could manifest as an explicit death wish nonetheless. The death drive also expresses itself in other behaviors which caught Freud's interest. Such behaviors are irrational forms of destructiveness rather than direct attempts to escape life. An example of such behavior is the concept of repetition compulsion. Freud saw that his patients often repeated self-destructive patterns or traumatic scenes, even when aware of this behavior. Personally, I tend to listen to music occasionally that evokes traumatic past experiences, including emotions such as sadness and melancholy. These are usually pieces of music I listened to during the times I had these experiences. Bringing back all these memories doesn't make sense. They're hurtful and don't contribute to my happiness and well-being. It's something I would be better off not doing, in the same way I would better not put my hand on a stove. Yet there's something strangely satisfying about it. In this case, it's a tendency to seek pain instead of pleasure, which Freud saw as a subtle manifestation of the death drive. Such endeavor comes across as conflicting within the notion that the death drive seeks relief from life's tension, as it, through repetition compulsion, maintains and even increases the tension. These contradictions make this concept so difficult to grasp and probably contribute to the fact that Freud's death drive is one of his work's most controversial and debated concepts. Freud also believed that the death drive doesn't purely direct itself inward. It also projects itself outward in the form of aggression toward others. According to Freud, aggressive behavior comes from a desire to destroy outside of the self. The phenomenon of sadism is an expression of the death drive as well, as opposed to masochism, which refers to a desire for pain and self-destruction. As we have explored in the previous chapter, within the wish for non-existence hides a more profound longing for relief. Peace, essentially. A curious expression of such longing, one that I've had plenty of experience with, is substance abuse. Why would someone drink himself into a coma? Why would people inject poisonous substances into their bodies? When we think of it, it's absurd. From the perspective of the death drive, this behavior is merely another manifestation of the unconscious longing to revert to the inanimate, given that the primary appeal of these substances is their ability to help one escape from reality. Freud's controversial concept received much criticism, and many psychoanalysts rejected it. Critics stated that there wasn't enough empirical evidence to prove the existence of such a drive. Also, other theories could explain self-destructive tendencies or outward aggressiveness, such as attachment theory, behaviorism, and cognitive theories. Cultural and societal factors may also influence how we view self-destruction and outward hostility. Still, there have been thinkers who further developed Freud's death drive, such as Jacques Lacan and Slavoj Žižek. Lacan, for example, rejected Freud's notion that the death drive is biological. Lacan saw it as a fundamental aspect of the symbolic order, the realm of symbols, language, and social norms that shape our reality. So according to Lacan, the death drive takes place more on the level of thought than biology. Žižek sees the death drive similarly, but expanded this idea, including a focus on the role of society, consumerism specifically, arousing the death drive. The death drive remains a topic of discussion. The concept challenges us to confront our self-destructive tendencies and the irrationality that often hides behind them. Are these behaviors random or products of conditioning or trauma? Or could there indeed be a force at play that longs for self-destruction or even death? I was also thinking about the topic of loneliness and social isolation in the light of the death drive. Could the tendency to isolate oneself from others also be a manifestation of it? What do you think? Please let us know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Imagine a world in which the vast majority of people are devoid of passion, ambition, and creativity. All they think about is comfort, security, some pleasures in the morning and some pleasures at night, just enough to be distracted from the emptiness of their existence. Any person who expresses a desire for greatness and standing out is ridiculed and laughed at, as conformity to the herd characterized by stagnation and mediocrity. Is the norm. The herd is complacent, without a sense of purpose or direction beyond maintaining their daily routines and satisfying their most basic needs. Such a world resembles Nietzsche's society of the last man, a sad state of affairs that he feared to be the consequence of religious decline. Nietzsche stated, "The earth has become small, and on it hops the last man, who makes everything small. His species is ineradicable as the flea. The last man lives longest. We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and they blink." End quote. Looking at today's circumstances, the experience of meaninglessness seems to be widespread. As Nietzsche had predicted, the decline of religion has created a void. For many, there's no clear, indisputable goal in life anymore. There's no all-encompassing superhuman authority, an undeniable creator that decides what's good or bad and how we should live and, thus, provides us with ultimate meaning. And so, indeed, it seems that many are lost. What's my purpose? People ask. Many try to forget the pointlessness of it all by indulging in sensual pleasure like drinking, partying, and binge-watching series. Others stick with their religions, despite their decline, and the scientific claims in conflict with them, or flock to new religious movements for guidance. And some embrace the idea that we're here for no reason, that there's no one to save us, and ultimate morality is non-existent. Nonetheless, they want to thrive, but are unsure how. And others can't take the meaninglessness of their lives anymore and call it quits. Philosophers have been dealing with the problem of meaninglessness for centuries. Their ideas about life, or how to live well in a meaningless universe, could be valuable to those struggling with a lack of meaning in their lives. Can we live well as humans when life has no inherent purpose? According to several philosophers, yes, we can, and according to some, we should. After all, if life loses meaning, there is still life. This video explores different ways by different philosophers to combat meaninglessness. The impact of traditional religious ideas is waning as we move closer toward modernity. Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher, noticed this pattern and realized how it would affect people's sense of meaning and purpose. He observed that as religious belief declined, people were left to face existential dilemmas independently without the support that one could find in religion. According to Kierkegaard, we cannot find true meaning and purpose in the realm of reason. Instead, we must commit to a specific belief system, even though this decision is irrational, defying logic and reason. For Kierkegaard, this leap of faith meant an embrace of religious life, a belief in God and commitment to God, despite the irrationality and contradictions from a purely logical perspective. Through this embrace, one transcends the chaos of meaninglessness, the many existential questions that could never be answered, and the persisting doubt of why we are here and what we should do. Again, it may not be the most logical and rational decision. Still, according to Kierkegaard's view, when we place ultimate trust and confidence in God and embrace our religious value system, we solve the problems of despair and meaninglessness. But such a step involves radical trust in the unknown. It requires faith. Also, it demands us to part with logic and reason, which many people aren't willing to do. Especially in the Western world, after people have been collectively distancing themselves from religion, they might not be too eager to return to it as a means to solve their existential angst. So, can't we overcome life's meaninglessness without a belief in God? What's left to do when life is pointless? So thought an adolescent woman lounging in her cozy living room, about to watch her favorite TV show, the same show her friends and colleagues watch and talk about on social media. Even though she thoroughly enjoyed the show while eating a bag of potato chips, she felt that emptiness afterward, a sensation cutting through the bone, which she had learned to suppress simply by engaging in another pleasure. Then Zarathustra appeared, interrupting her endless cycle of shallow pursuit. He gazed into her eyes and saw the unfulfilled potential within her. He said her feelings of emptiness result from a lack of strong meaning and ambition, and that short-term pleasures will never solve this. Instead, she should create her own meaning in life and forge her own path. Among many others, the woman had personified the last man, an archetype created by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, a consequence of religious decline and the lack of purpose that arose from it. The last man is characterized by indifference, self-satisfaction, and the absence of ambition, creative spirit, and purpose. This individual is motivated solely by sensual enjoyment, convenience, and security. He has regressed into a mere pleasure-seeking creature amidst a stagnant mass of meek, complacent zombies. Nietzsche's solution to the problem of meaninglessness lies in becoming an Übermensch, or overman, which we explored more in depth in a previous video. But in short, Nietzsche saw the overman as an individual who creates their own values and meaning, rejecting the herd mentality and conventional morality, shaping his own destiny. He didn't specifically describe a single purpose one should follow, implying that it's up to the individual to determine. But we could assume that it's one considered significant enough to dedicate one's life to, be it a work of art, scientific discovery, or philosophical insight. Not so different from Kierkegaard, Nietzsche's idea of meaning lies in one's dedication to something bigger, albeit not in religion, but in something authentically belonging to ourselves. God is dead, after all, Nietzsche proclaimed. When we examine our surroundings, we discover that most objects, or human inventions, if you will, have been created for a reason. Take, for example, a fork. This tableware has been invented for a purpose, namely to simplify the act of eating. But could we say this of a human being as well? were we, like the fork, designed with a specific purpose in mind? The idea that existence precedes essence captures Jean-Paul Sartre's belief that we are born without a predefined purpose and that it is up to us to define our own meaning in life. The existentialist philosophy of this French philosopher emphasizes the freedom and responsibility of each individual to establish their own standards, objectives, and meaning. As we don't have a predestined purpose when we're born, we're like empty canvases waiting to be filled, which is a purpose ascribed to ourselves. Sartre believed that people are inherently free and capable of making decisions that mold their lives and give them meaning. This freedom can be a double-edged sword, though, as it means that we are fully accountable for our decisions and the results that come from those decisions. Sartre stated, "He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself." Thus, there's no human nature, because there's no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. Not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills, and as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap towards existence. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. That is the first principle of existentialism." End quote. From Sartre's viewpoint, unlike the fork, we aren't designed with a purpose, but quite tragically, perhaps, humans tend to long intensely for it. Unfortunately, the seemingly indifferent universe doesn't provide us with a universal meaning or purpose that could satisfy this longing, which can be both liberating and terrifying. Only after accepting this inherent human lack of purpose, we can take responsibility for our lives and confidently create authentic and personal meaning. But in doing so, we should always mind the consequences for ourselves and others, according to Sartre. Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into this world, he is responsible for everything he does, Sartre stated, implying both the blessing and burden of the human condition. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, presented a unique perspective on the search for meaning in his groundbreaking book, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl, through his intense suffering, came to a profound realization that it was meaning rather than pleasure or power that was the true driving force behind human action. His view on how we as humans acquire this meaning is different from the existentialist viewpoints of Nietzsche and Sartre, who both encourage us to create meaning. According to Frankl, meaning ensues from our engagement with the world and our response to the circumstances we find ourselves in. He believed that even in the most challenging and seemingly hopeless situations, we can still discover meaning by taking responsibility for our choices, attitudes, and actions. In other words, it's not about the circumstances themselves, but how we choose to respond to them that ultimately determines the meaning we derive from life. An example of this he finds in his horrible experiences in the concentration camps, when at some point one's destiny is to suffer. In that situation, accepting and enduring this suffering becomes one's task, wherein the meaning lies hidden. Frankl calls this a unique opportunity in which a person can choose how he will bear his burden. Similarly, we could apply this finding of meaning in suffering to illness, going through a breakup, or, for example, a loss of a loved one. So we don't create meaning according to Frankl, but we find meaning in our circumstances. Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. End quote. Drawing on his experiences in Nazi concentration camps, Frankl developed a therapeutic approach called logotherapy, which posits that our primary motivation in life is to find meaning rather than seek pleasure or avoid pain. His theory of logotherapy proposes that we can discover meaning in three ways. Firstly, through creating a work or doing a deed. our professional pursuits, hobbies, and contributions to society. Then there's the meaning to be found in love. By experiencing something, a piece of art, nature, or another person, we can find meaning. And most profoundly, in our attitudes in the face of unavoidable suffering. Albert Camus, a French-Algerian philosopher, considered life to be inherently meaningless. As he observed the world around him, he noticed that the human desire to find meaning often clashed with the irrational and indifferent nature of the universe. The universe seems not to provide meaning at all, but at the same time, human beings crave meaning. This confrontation, according to Camus, is the essence of the absurd. The tragic pursuit of meaning in a meaningless universe could make people despair. And so, Camus proposed 3 ways to respond to this despair: physical suicide, philosophical suicide, and acceptance. There's only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide, wrote Albert Camus in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus saw the act of suicide as a natural response to the absurd. Stating this shows the urgency of this philosophical problem and the seriousness of the question of meaning. After all, it's a matter that could lead to people ending their lives. Then he distinguished philosophical suicide, which is the utterly tempting adoption of a belief system. It's the leap of faith Kierkegaard wrote about, but according to Camus, a means to escape the absurd. Both physical and philosophical suicide Camus saw as the rejection of freedom that the absurd gives us. Hence, he proposed a 3rd way, which is acceptance and revolt. Through acceptance and revolt, we remain aware of the discrepancy between the meaning-craving human and the meaningless universe, and don't try to sugarcoat this reality. At the same time, Camus urges us to reject the search and hope for meaning and live lucidly in the present moment by focusing on life itself, like having a good time with friends, eating a nice meal, going for a run, whatever it takes not to fall into the trap of despair and the eventual attempt to escape the absurd. That's the revolt, the rebellion against the absurd, to live well despite it. Camus took inspiration from the Greek myth of Sisyphus, who was condemned to eternally push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back each time it neared the top. He argued that, despite the apparent futility of Sisyphus' task, one could imagine him finding joy in his labor. Similarly to Sisyphus, we can embrace the absurd by living our lives with passion and intensity, despite our predicament. When the universe grants us no meaning of life, despite our desire and pursuits to establish it, then what's left is life. In that case, what else can we do than live it? Thank you for watching. Imagine a world in which the vast majority of people are devoid
consciousness. It's our awareness, our understanding, our ignorance. Our daily consciousness leaves out more than it takes in. And due to this, it leaves out important things. Things that would help relieve us if we knew them. If we had a higher awareness, a better consciousness, we would feel better. We would be more at peace with things. The deep down truth of things is screened by our consciousness. Our sensory organs will pick things out. Our eyes can only see certain things. Our ears can only hear certain things. We have to create instruments and other tools to see things we as humans cannot, to expand our understanding and thus our ego, or consciousness. Humans evolved and became the dominant species on Earth by a long shot. It's due to our innate ability to network with each other. If humanity was wiped out and restarted, like loading an old save file, communities would still form. Structures within society are inevitable due to the variety of brains. Some are good at critical thinking, others are more artistic. However, we are all wired with some innate features. Just as humans form societies that evolve, other creatures do as well. But we're different. We are customizable characters, basically. We can kind of mold ourselves into whatever kind of person we want to be. We can't know for certain that animals or any other life on Earth is conscious or can even function in the same way that we do. Let's put it this way. I know that I have my own thoughts and feelings and emotions, but how can I know for certain that you or anyone else does? There's no way I can go to your head and see things 100% from your perspective. I can't know what you're thinking, or if you can even think in the first place. To truly understand the universe, to understand and actually experience life, you have to give yourself up. There's no point in sustaining bliss, in being permanently at an all-time high. The life you're living is what you have put yourself into, what ego you've formed, only you don't want to admit it. You want to believe it happened to you. Day to day, you play non-bliss in order to be able to experience bliss. You put yourself into bad situations. You let in the negative experiences in life just to feel some kind of satisfaction when it goes the other way. Self implies other. White implies black. Death implies life. You can feel your existence as fundamental, not as an accident. At the basic level, at the lowest level imaginable, you are the fundamentals of existence. The same thing that makes you is the same thing that makes up everything else. If you can step back from what you believe, if you can step back from what your sensory organs have turned you into, you start to see things for what they actually are. Do you define yourself as a victim of the world, or as the world? Love is only possible due to the lack of self.